Hello there, Evie here, and welcome to the Cooler Master Summit of 2021. They are launching, or will be launching, a pile of products that they're showing at this event. You can go to summit.coolermaster.com to check this stuff out for yourself, but I've gone through and divulged all the salient points from all the things that they're launching, and I'm going to be presenting it in this video and upcoming ones, this one covering the cases and coolers, and then there'll be peripherals and streaming stuff and some weird cockpit thing they've got going on. That's a really quirky one I'll sort of talk about then on those other videos. Now, this is going to take a little bit of time to go through this, so if you want to skip to particular ones, then please go ahead. I'm going to be going through all the features that are, say, salient, that make sense, that are, well, actual features to talk about rather than sort of filler marketing fluff, that kind of thing. I might spend a minute or so on each one, and there's about 11 things to go through, so we're looking at maybe a 15-minute video all in all. Anyway, let's start off with the half 500 black or the half 500 white. Two color options for this one. You have a large mesh front panel, which is great in terms of seeing through the panel. Won't be so good at filtering out the fine particles of dust, but it'll do okay with the larger particles of dust, which is not so bad. But like I said, it allows you to see through to the dual 200mm ARGB fans, which they're big fans taking up more than the width of that front mesh panel there. So it's two big blocks of ARGB, which is nice. They should be quite quiet because since they're 200mm fans, and you do get an included hub to control it. And the other fans in there's a rear 120mm and another one that is another ARGB 120mm fan that's attached to a rotatable GPU fan bracket of sorts. It's mounted to the hard disk drive cage towards the bottom front of the case, and it's not a good looker. It's not a good appealing looking thing as far as I'm concerned. It might have a secondary function of being able to direct the light that ARGB fan produces, which might be good. I'm a little skeptical on its function as a fan to direct airflow into your graphics card. I'm skeptical of that. Maybe they thought they might want to include it for those who maybe don't want to ramp up those 200mm fans at the front, or maybe they're thinking they need to compensate for the not massive static pressure capabilities of 200mm fans. Maybe there's something in there, but it looks interesting, and I'd certainly like to check it out to see if it's any good. So, stay tuned for that, I guess, if I can get my holds on it. Anyway, they have USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C support for the I/O, which is great, and the side panel, the glass, has screwless and tool-free TG side panel design. That's what they're calling it. If this is anything like the NZXT H210i side panel, which it looks like it's very similar to, captive thumb screw and a very small tab up top to pull it off, it will be bad. But if they've tuned the ball and sockets sort of strength that's holding the panel on in the first place, it might not be so bad. So it depends on how firm that ball and socket system is. We've also got a removable top panel, which I've seen in cases like the Metallic Gear Neo Air, and it is really handy. Like, let's say if you forget to install or connect the EPS connector to your board, the CPU power at the top left of your board, and you've already installed your CPU cooler, and I don't want to have to take that off, my hand's too big to fit down the side because the size of the cooler and that sort of thing. Removing that is much easier than removing, say, a CPU cooler and having to remount that, so it's a nice feature to have, really handy. And they've also got their last point for this is versatile cooling options. You can put up to 720mm fans in here and dual 360mm radiators, one to the top and one to the front. So yeah, pretty solid all round, seems relatively well thought out, and it looks like a cool case, and I'd certainly like to check it out. You got support up to E80X board with this one. You have the included ARGB hub, two 120mm ARGB fans, and then another two 120mm fans on the GPU fan bracket and on the rear. And last point is there's a 2-year warranty, which is pretty standard for a case from a company like Cooler Master. Next up is the Masterbox 500, and I'm kind of interested in this for all the wrong reasons. So that front panel looks very exclusive. It looks very nice, very interesting. I think that front panel is a brushed aluminium effect on plastic panel, which personally I quite prefer. There's the Fractal Design Define cases, I think, did a similar thing, and I really like that effect rather than brushed aluminium itself. It looks great, and it's way easier to maintain. So anyway, to the bottom, there's a small opening. That's a small mesh panel opening, which really has the intake area for maybe at max a couple 120mm fans, but realistically it's kind of the area for one 140. There is room in there for up to 3 120mm fans to the front, and you can even stick a 360mm radiator behind there. But in terms of the actual intake area, I'd like to see maybe if there's side openings or something that they're increasing that with. Might be a pretty poor performer. We'll see. It has an ARGB front panel, ARGB effects going down the front. They're calling this mesh front panel thing fine mesh, but it's just a mesh panel, so let's not get too excited about that. We have a removable top panel like the last one, so again, great if you forget to install your CPU power connector last minute. You've got the same, side panel attachment system, which could be awful if it's anything like the H210i's. Hopefully it's not. And then again, support for 720mm fans, dual 360mm radiators, and one of their feature points was room for upgrades, which in an EATX supporting case, which is a large case, there better be room for upgrades. It just seems a bit of marketing fluff you got to look past. You get an ARGB controller to control all the effects of the front panel, and the fans are included. Only one Sickle Flow PWM ARGB fan with this, and then you've got a rear MF120 fan, non-ARGB, so nothing to be too excited there. Yeah, everything else seems pretty standard. CPU cooler clearance 165mm, 160 is pretty standard these days, and you get a 2-year warranty, so not much more to say there. Next up is the NR200P Max, and there is a lot to say about this one, because frankly, this is potentially one of the most compelling cases that they are launching in the near future. This is an offshoot of the NR200P, it's the Max version, this one. So you've got a few features which just not present on the previous one. There's been a fairly substantial redesign. So, for instance, you get a pre-installed 850 watt power supply unit and a pre-installed tailor-made 280mm radiator, which comes with your CPU block and all that sort of stuff. So this is going to be pricey. I haven't got any price figures right now. Maybe they'll divulge that on the keynote on Thursday, Friday time, depending on your region. So yeah, there's clearly a lot of expensive kit going into this. It won't be cheap. But you've also got some pretty cool stuff, like there's a quick install GPU panel, which it's essentially like a removable, like it's similar or close to a motherboard tray removable thing, but it's just the rear panel. Think the Dynamic Mini, Linearly Dynamic Mini in terms of that rear panel. Yeah, it's in a sense kind of similar to what you can do there, but for this. Anyway, yeah, so that looks really good. You've got options for your side panels, so you can go mesh, or for more ventilation, or glass for better visuals. And yeah, 360-degree access, you can remove all the panels. It comes in black and grey. It's pretty much the same size as the NR200P, the original one. Just it's a smidge larger, like 0.1 litre or something. It's a tiny difference. MITX support only, 3 expansion slots, so you can fit your large cards in there, which you might want to use the mesh panel instead of the glass one if you're going for a big card. But if you're water cooling, then hey ho. You get a PCI Express 4.0 riser cable, which we'll be talking more about later. They're doing some releases on that too. You got the cooling solution, and you've got it's the SFX power supply unit that's got a 10-year warranty, but you've got 2 years for the case and 2 years for the thermal solution, which is okay. It's okay. I'd like that to be higher, to be honest, because last thing you want is now failing after 2 years, which I don't think is reasonable, in my opinion. Moving on, by popular vote apparently, we've got the Masterbox NR200P, not the Max version. You've got more colours. You've got purple, orange, cyan, and pink. They're calling them Caribbean Blue, Sunset Orange, Nightshade Purple, and Flamingo Pink, which is nice. Powder-coated SGCC steel. It's basically just different colour of it. Anyway, it's just colours, really. They look great, and if you're into that kind of thing, then check that one out. It's going to be quite difficult to choose between, say, the NR200P Max and the nice colors and stuff you can get with the NR200. You don't get, say, horizontal mounting options with the Max version, so there's differences in the setup, and it really depends on what you want. But I have a feeling that Max is going to be really expensive, probably $150 plus. $200 plus, to be honest, because of the power supply unit and the cooling solution. Make it $300. Yeah, it's going to be, you know, you're going to have deep pockets for that. Moving on, the Masterbox TD300 mesh and the white version. This is very much like the TD500 mesh in terms of its design. The side panel window doesn't go all the way to the bottom. You don't have the cutting grooves into the edge of the glass, so if you really wanted that in a smaller version, you're not going to get it here. But yeah, it's essentially the same as that, but it's a micro ATX version, or mini ITX if you want to stick a smaller board in, of the TD500 mesh. And I really like the paint job on the TD500 mesh. Very nice, very high quality. So yeah, I'm expecting this one to be really nice in terms of quality, if it's anything like that. You got the polygonal mesh front panel, same as TD500 mesh. You get a couple of PWM ARGB sickle flow fans, so cost fans included, which is nice. You get an ARGB and PWM hub, so that covers the fans and anything else you want to add. You got a removable top panel, pretty standard for Cooler Master cases now, which is great. Tempered glass side panel, which is standard, and this is where like the fluff comes in, you know. Adaptable drive cage, you can slide it forward and back. It is what it is. So yeah, it's basically just a cut down version of the TD500 mesh. Black and white versions, ARGB hub included, and there's no warranty information on hold for this. CPU cooler support 166mm, very standard for an ATX case. And that's pretty much the cases done for. So they got a couple of extra case accessories. So they're introducing the MasterAccessory riser cable, PCI Express 4.0 x16, 300mm and 200mm. So it's a PCI Express Gen 4 riser cable in 200 and 300mm variants. You've also got a universal graphics card holder kit V2. It's basically the upgraded PCI Express Gen 4 version of the previous one. And yeah, so if you're looking in the market for, or on the market for that kind of thing, there you have it. And last for the case accessory kind of thing is LED tube sleeve A1. It's a sleeve that goes over, say, your AIO cables. They've presented a lot of, or provided a lot of images of how you could use it, and it's just a way to ARGBify your dull AIO cables, if that's something you want to do. It comes in 10 and 12mm variants. It's made of soft rubber, and it has 30 ARGB LEDs in each strip tube sleeve thing. It's a 330mm long, and it's a 5-volt 3-pin ARGB, so I think that's your J Rainbow connector, and it has a 2-year warranty. So it looks interesting. I'd like to see what that looks like in person. I wouldn't jump out and buy that before seeing some reviews on that personally. So now we're getting on into the coolers, and there's a very significant or very specific style that they've got to coolers nowadays. These top panels, they're going for a top panel design, which looks really cool, and they're not painting the tower or messing around with, say, nickel plating the heat pipes. So yeah, it's a style that I quite like the look of, and they have got a dual tower version of this, which we'll look at in a second. So in terms of specs or features, we got the gunmetal polished or brushed, aluminium top cover. We have low profile asymmetrical heat pipes. It's just good ram clearance is essentially the target there. They have extra dimensional heat pipe contact, which is basically direct touch heat pipes. Yeah, it typically typically not that great for really large sockets or really large die CPUs, but we'll have to see how it performs and what reviewers have when they're using those kind of large sockets, what they're like in that respect. And you get a sickle flow 120mm ARGB fan with it. And another feature is extra fan bracket. So yeah, in terms of CPU socket support, you've got all your typical LGA Intel stuff. You've got the 1200 and the 1150 series ones. And for AMD, you've got all the older ones, AM4, but there's no Threadripper support for this, which I think is, for obvious reasons, probably a sensible idea. It's 158mm tall, so just under the 160mm typical case support, so that's pretty fair in my opinion. But the fan only goes down to 650 RPM minimum, up to 1800 RPM, and frankly, it's not going to be one to look out for really if you're looking for a really quiet build. It might be quiet, but it's not silent. You can't stop the fan entirely if you wanted to. It also comes with a 3-year warranty. Next up, it's basically the same as the previous one, but this is the Hyper H6 DT ARGB. It's the dual tower version, hence the DT of the previous one. And yeah, it's basically everything the previous one was, but you get 2 fans. yeah, 3-year warranty. So that's all I need to say on that one. And lastly, for the cooler side of things, is the MasterLiquid ML240 FLUX and the 360 FLUX. Now, this was a little bit weird in terms of specifications, because what they provided was, for this, was PowerPoint files, not PDFs, and they both had the 360mm Flux's specification on there. So pinch of salt with this for now. In terms of AIO features, it's really hard to figure out what's marketing fluff and what's actually meaningful. So you've got performance dual chamber, so there's dual chambers to the CPU block. Does that make a big difference in terms of performance from the previous? Who knows? Superior performance ratio, combined copper base micro channel stuff. Who knows? Radiator fan enhancement. Okay. Fan noise calibration. Now I've got a slight point to make about this, is that these are 2,300 RPM fans. They're going to be loud regardless, so you're probably not going to be using those at max speed very often, if at all. Only under really heavy load, say you're rendering with, say, your TR4 socket based CPU, which this does support. So it has one color option, black. You've got all your typical support for say your Intel 1200, 1150 series socket, your AM4, and all the other older sockets for AMD, and TR4, which, for an AIO, it would make sense to use an AIO on a big high power socket like Threadripper. You've got your LED fans, which are addressable Gen 2 RGB ones, which means something, and again, they're 2,300 RPM fans, so they are going to be fast and loud. But you have a 5-year warranty, which I think is pretty good. So last on the cooling side of things, we have the Mobius Fans. And that's all I can really say, because all they provided is pictures for this one, which is a shame, but I presume that they're coming in the ARGB. They also might not be ARGB. They might also be non-ARGB fans, which is a thing. Yeah, there's not much to say here. I'd like the look of the non-ARGB ones. If they come in that option, I'd like to see non-ARGB fans be an option around these days, and yeah, but there's no specs with them. No specs provided. I couldn't find any, so they will exist, which should be interesting. But yeah, they look interesting enough. So that's it. Thank you so much for checking this one out. I know it's been a long one. We're looking at up to 20 minutes now, which is unfortunate. But hey, if you're going to cover things in relatively decent details, bit of time needs to be spent on doing so. So I'm really looking forward to the HAF 500 series. That looks cool. I'm skeptical about the Masterbox 500. The color options for the NR200p look great, and the NR200p Max looks really nice. I'd love to review that if I can get my hands on it. TD300 mesh, it's going to be very similar to the previous TD500, just smaller, and those ARGB sleeve things look really, yeah, I genuinely think this is actually a pretty good launch. There's quite a lot to be interested in, and I like the look of the dual tower cooler, the H6 DT ARGB, and yeah, so yeah, let me know what you think about it in the comments. I think there's plenty to look forward to from Cooler Master in the upcoming future. Thanks for checking this one out. Stay tuned for all the other stuff that they've got launched this week, or they're presenting this week and they're launching in the future, and I'll catch you then. Thanks for checking this one out. I really don't know how to end these ones. Wi-Fi was disconnected on my camera, apparently, because it's too hot. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.